Rix Weaver, author, teacher and Jungian analyst, born in Claremont in Perth in 1902. After completing university college and 2 years teaching, she resigned to marry Arthur Weaver when she was 22. An early interest in Freud and the unconscious led Irene to the writings of Swiss philosopher and analyst Carl Jung. And in 1951 she was the first Australian to study at the Carl Jung Institute in Zurich. Her meetings with Jung made a lasting impression on her, and after 5 years in Switzerland, she returned to Australia and founded the Analytical Psychology Club of Perth. Over the last 30 years, Irene has practiced Jungian analysis and written several books popularising the theories of Carl Jung. Her most recent novel, The Golden Ginkgo Tree, will be published later this year. Irene Rix Weaver, woman in question, speaks with Dagmar Strauss.
Irene, at 80 you've lived through many eras. What would you say has been the greatest change that you've observed in your lifetime?
Well, I think the swiftness of life has changed. I remember, for instance, when some of my family went to Europe when I was a child. It was considered quite an adventure, but of course now it's quite natural. That is one of the things, and I think people are more aware today, asking more questions about life and what it is about, because life was slower.
Mm. Your mother was very interested in metaphysics.
Yes.
Did that influence you at all to research into the unconscious and into psychology?
I imagine it did, yes, because right from the beginning of my student days I was very interested in psychology and anything of that nature.
The great philosopher, psychiatrist Carl Jung has dominated your life's work and interest. What actually led you to Jung?
Well, that's a roundabout story, you know. I did have some Freudian analysis. Because, not that I had a personal problem, but because I wanted to know things. And then I read Modern Man in Search of a Soul. I discovered that what I was in search of was soul. So, of course, I was led to Jung, and as soon as the war was over, I began to make my journey there to Switzerland.
What made you choose Jung over and above Freud? You were saying you had Freudian analysis.
Well, I found that Jung had looked at the deeper meaning of life rather than just the everyday problems. Well, you see, Jung's psychology synthesizes, it builds on what you are, whereas the Freudian approach is, it's reductive. And so that you might lose your problems, you might lose your devils, but you also lose your angels, you see. And this is what Jung tried to hang on to.
In 1955, you actually had a personal session and meeting with Jung, which was very memorable.
Yes, it was. I had met him on many occasions socially at the club and at his 80th birthday party when I took a lot of photos of him. Yes, that was a very memorable occasion because to meet him meant that afterwards I found that he had stimulated something so deeply in me that I couldn't forget a word he'd said.
What was the overriding impression that he was trying to convey to you? Was there one sort of theme which he was particularly concerned about?
Yes, he was particularly concerned with the unconsciousness of man, that he felt that technology had far outstripped his knowledge of what man was, and that it was like these days of putting a kilo of gelignite in the hands of a 2-year-old, and he felt that man had to catch up psychologically to where he was technically.
When you say that he felt man was hopelessly unconscious or unself-conscious, what does that actually mean? Could you explain that a little bit more?
Well, Yes, because Jung was very interested in the meaning of life. When you ask the question, what is this life? What is it all about? Why am I here? You begin to ask the right questions about the world and the people in it. Not just the technical advantages which we do have from technology.
A sort of self-awareness.
A self-awareness and an awareness of the need of mankind.
Also, at that time that you had this meeting with Jung, I think you were telling me that his wife was very ill and he received news of her imminent death.
While I was there, he received that news. And I offered to leave him then, but he wanted me to sit down and talk. So he talked to me a great deal about death, one of the things he said was that if one's life had been fulfilled, if one had really lived their potential, then death was merely a stepping into another world, as it were. It was a drawing together of two worlds.
He was obviously not frightened of death. Are you?
No, I'm not frightened of death. Schopenhauer said that a death is the reservoir of life.
But most people do fear death and oblivion. Why do you think that is?
Perhaps it is because they haven't felt they have filled their potential, that their life has not been really lived.
Does death for you mean some sort of belief in afterlife?
Not exactly, as generally considered afterlife. Of course, the body dies, and one doesn't expect to have that identity. But I think the consciousness that we've built up is all part of the growth of the world itself.
So you feel that your consciousness will continue after you've gone?
Yes, but not as an individual.
Could you explain that a bit further?
Well, I won't continue as Rix Weaver, for instance, but I will continue as part of the consciousness that is behind creation.
Would you call yourself religious in any sense?
Yes, in the sense that I do have a lot of conscious consideration about what life is about.
And where does God fit into this? What does God mean to you?
What does God mean to me? I think that it means that which is behind creation. I am not a theologian, and I can't explain God in a theological sense. But to me, it is that consciousness or that intelligence behind creation which we can see. That brings up, of course, something that happened in Africa to Jung. He asked one of the elders, "But how do you know there is God?" And the elder said, picked up a blade of grass and handed it to him, so that it's the manifestation of this world that tells us most of what we want to know. What we want to know is right here.
Jung was very much in touch with nature, wasn't he?
Oh yes, indeed. He was a very good cook too.
Why do you think it is that Jung isn't as readily accepted in academic circles these days as, say, Freud is?
Because Freud is easier to learn from the point of view of being, for instance, in his dream analysis, this certain thing means that, and so forth. And it's based on sexuality. If the sex is right, then everything is right for Freud. Whereas for Jung, if the spirit is right, everything is right. So he really bases his psychology on something that is much harder for the ordinary student to grasp, unless they're gifted that way, shall I say, to looking for that side of life.
Do you think also it's because Jung isn't as accessible to the rational, and our society is very much based on a rational approach to explaining phenomena?
Well, you see, Jung was an empiricist, very much so. And this is why before he made his decisions, he analysed 67,000 dreams. But he also gave credit to the irrational. Now, it's not very difficult to look at life and say, well, there is a very irrational side to it, because what does it mean? The rational side means that we can reason with it, but there are aspects of life we can't reason with, and they are there.
He was more.
They're just a story.
He was more prepared to deal with the
and
bizarre.
he was prepared to deal with that side of life. Yes, because everything that belonged to man's psyche, Jung saw as being very important, or he wouldn't be caught by it.
I find it quite interesting that while he's not accepted so readily in academic circles, there is a general popularity of Jungian theory these days.
Oh yes, and it is being accepted also into academic circles in some of the universities. It is here.
Do you think the general popularity of Jung has something to do with the fact that he foreshadowed the androgyny of mankind, his concern with the anima and animus, the masculine-feminine principle?
Yes, it possibly has, because this is coming to the fore now in our lives. And he did see that as very important, of the relationship between man and woman, that a man should see his feminine side or recognize it, which he called the anima, and that a woman should see her masculine side. Can I tell you a little story about that? There was a woman who went to a party that Jung was at, and she was a very intellectual woman, a very what we would call an animus woman, and so she followed him around and talked to him a very great deal. And then at last I said to him, what do you think of me, Professor Jung? And he said, I haven't met you yet. So this is the difference between just being too much on the masculine side, but there's a balance required.
Yes, Jung is very modern in that respect, isn't he? And that his theory tackles the whole balance between masculine and feminine today.
That's right. So that men are not afraid then to show their feminine side, which has really been pushed down in past generations. You know, you have to be very masculine. And men are not afraid these days to show that they have a feeling and warmth and related side, which is what the anima means.
Would you say that women have explored their animus side, their masculine principle side, more than men have explored their feminine side to the present time?
I couldn't answer that one directly, because I don't know, but I know that men are more inclined now to be at the birth of their children, to take part in the whole of life, but women, of course, have been forced into the outer world very much, because in professional life, in business life, etc., they have to have that discriminating masculine side, has to be educated.
And then, of course, it's the balance within the person,
but
isn't it?
Of course, the androgyny you spoke about is not on the outer side. It is purely psychological, and it is the inner development of the balance, so that one is balanced between one's masculinity and femininity.
Yes, coming back to Jung, all great philosophers have their critics, and while Jung is undoubtedly a great man, was in his time and is in retrospect, he was very often criticised for dabbling in parapsychology, astrology, fortune-telling and telepathy. Do you think that's justified?
No, it's not, because what he did from a scientific point of view. When he saw that everything that a man spent time on was obviously important to him, and therefore he always asked the question, why? What does this mean to the psychological development of these people? And therefore he investigated it. He didn't just put things out.
Now, you've also done a lot of travelling in your life,
Mm-hmm.
and in the, was it early 1960s, you went on a journey to the centre of Australia, which was quite an eye-opener for you. Can you tell me about that?
Yes. You see, actually, that journey started in Switzerland because I had a dream in Switzerland in which an Aborigine turned up, and I knew nothing about the Aborigines. And I was rather ashamed when I was asked there, could I answer the questions about them? I couldn't. And my analyst, in looking at this, she said, have you... but you must know something about your Aborigine. You must see them all the time. And I said, but I don't see them all the time. And her idea of Australia must have been quite a bit like Switzerland looked, because her answer was, but surely when you go walking in the woods on Sunday, you meet the Aborigines. Because the Swiss always walk in the woods on Sundays.
They thought Aborigines were everywhere to be seen.
Everywhere in the woods, yes.
Yes. Tell me a little bit about this visit to Alice Springs.
Oh, yes. Well, I was walking through a shop here in Perth. I had come back from Switzerland, and I met Bill Honey, whom I had met years before, and he said, if you want to come to the centre, come now, and I will show you a great deal. And he did, and he introduced me to Aboriginal people who sang for me, and were, through him, he interpreted what they were saying. And I learned quite a lot about their rituals, which are tremendously meaningful. Oh, they really are tremendous. And what I learned there was the basis of my going back to Switzerland and lecturing on the Aborigines at the Institute.
You saw there, did you, the connection between Jung's unconscious and the Aboriginal dream time?
It's absolutely, it comes through in its absolute purity with the Aborigines. It's uncluttered.
What else were you able to observe from the Australian Aborigine?
The very high quality of their moral code. One went with this particular ritual that I studied. These Aborigines went through so much in the becoming adult to begin with, and then the responsibility that was put upon them as adults, which they had to live. And of course, if they didn't, they become detribalized, and then they became the wanderers, the fringe dwellers.
Yes, we've lost those rites of passage, haven't we?
Yes. I don't think they belong to our Western world now. A boy gets a driver's license. He doesn't know he's a man other than that.
And what about their in touch with nature? Was that very interesting for you to observe, their respect for the land?
Yes, they had great respect for the land. You see, for instance, if they dug yams, they would always put back the part that grew again, the eye, and make a little hollow. But not for themselves, because they were moving on, but because you treated the world like the land itself was the Great Mother, and you have to respect the Great Mother, which is one of the things we have not done as Western people.
Well, then you went to Zurich and you met Jung, and you studied at the Jung Institute in Zurich. This obviously concerned itself a lot with dreams. I mean, that's the sort of backbone of the Jungian analysis, isn't it?
Well, yes.
You've spent a lot of time analysing other people's dreams, probably, but
yes, indeed.
you were telling me that you also had a recurring dream yourself that was very significant in its interpretation. Could you tell me about that one?
Was that the one to do with the rooms?
Yes.
The open-sided rooms?
Yes.
That was, I think we're referring here to a dream I had of Jung. When Jung said to me, I went into this open-sided room, and he said, eternity stands upright. At the time I didn't understand it, why he would say such a thing. It was only gradually I began to realize that eternity in its positive aspect is not is something that is a build-up of the levels of consciousness.
And what's the significance of your open-sided room?
I think the significance of that, which comes very often and still does come into dreams sometimes, is the fact that I have always been open to something new coming in, to move on, always to find more and more about life and what is in life, and something that can lead me a little further.
Is that part of the secret of being fulfilled, to always be open to new experience rather than, as you get older, to close down or close off?
Well, it has been for me, and you see, at 80 you've lost a lot of friends. They've gone from this world, and I have a lot of young friends from 20 to 50 more, and this means that I'm in constant contact with young thought and the changing of young thought, because young people today are asking such important questions. Very important questions.
What sort of questions?
Well, the meaning of life is just the technology we see around us. Is this all that life's about? This is the sort of thing they want to know.
You were talking before about being 80, and I'd like to know whether you feel that people tend to patronise you as you get older.
I haven't found that. I haven't found anybody patronising me. Perhaps I've just been fortunate in that.
I've always felt that people who have lived a fulfilled life and who have a sort of spiritual concern or spiritual quality about them are very self-contained, not needing anyone else or anything. Would that be true?
I think that it might be, that if you have lived life to its fullest capacity, as you see it, yes, I think you're right about that.
Well, at 80, you've just completed a novel called The Ginkgo Tree, which hopefully will be made into a film next year. Why did you choose that title? What does the ginkgo tree mean?
Well, the ginkgo tree, of course, is the oldest known tree in the world. It is native, actually, to China, and it is a sacred tree there and in Japan, and a tree of destiny. And this is what my book is about, is really the living out of one's destiny.
On the surface of it, that book is really a love story, but of course it's much, much more than that.
Yes, it is an unfolding of a life where a woman moves from being quite happily innocent of any deeper meaning of life to discovering, through both suffering and happiness, what life is about.
Are you trying to say in that book that self-realization and awareness is some sort of higher state than merely being in love?
Oh yes, yes indeed, because love is a very open-handed thing. Real love can be very open-handed. It doesn't tie the other person. As Jung once said, we can ask the question, who loves me? Are they asking me to fill an empty bowl, or are they coming to share with me a life?
Yes. One of the things that I found fascinating about the book was that while the hero and heroine are still passionately in love, they decide to part and let the other person go.
Yes.
What were you trying to say there?
Oh, well, I was trying to say there that love is not binding. If we really love a person, we won't bind them.
You've written a lot of books and you've done a lot of research, but this is a novel. Was there something different about the ginkgo tree for you in writing this way rather than doing historical research?
I started off my writing by doing historical research, which took me years, and that was very, very interesting period of my life when I was young. And I had Sir James Mitchell to help me, and Dr. Batty, etc. They were marvellously helpful. But then, of course, I became interested in Jung and went over there. Then my books were Jungian-based and really written as textbooks. Although they're read largely by the public. But the novel, now you ask about that, I felt that there were things I wanted to say, but I wanted to say them just to everybody who will read a novel. Because I felt that there's so many things one can say just so simply that are so important.
That you can get across best in a novel rather than a textbook.
I felt so, because who's going to pick up a textbook anyway?
If I were to ask you what was your most privately held philosophy or belief, what would you say?
Well, there is a destiny. I think I have discovered that there is a destiny. You can't seem to escape it. But you can make of it what you wish. You have you have a choice.
You've obviously made of yours what you wanted to, is that right?
Where I could, yes. I have been asked if I would like to undo any of my life. I would like to have had the knowledge when I was young that I have gathered over 80 years. But then I would not have had the experience of learning from life, so perhaps it wouldn't have been right anyway. I think perhaps the joy of living is that you are learning about life all the time. And I will go on learning about life.